Alright guys, in this video I'm going to talk about why is debt so bad anyway. Alright, some nerds among you will be really happy about this example, but let's take 4 fictional countries and let's just assign them some random government debt amount. So let's say the country of Hammerfell has a government debt of $25 billion. That means that there are $25 billion of outstanding bonds. So people own these bonds, and through these bonds, Hammerfell owes them $25 billion. And Cyrodiil is another fictional country that owes $75 billion. Skyrim is another fictional country that owes $5 billion to various people, and elsewhere owes $7 billion to various people. Now, if you just look at these numbers, it really looks like Cyrodiil is in a bad situation and Skyrim is pretty well off. You'd want to be Skyrim right now. Well, let's see if that's true. Because it's really going to be a matter of how able you are to pay that back. So we're going to have to look at something else. We're going to have to look at GDP as well, because that's how much you produce in a year. And how much you produce in a year is how much the government could possibly tax and therefore have available to them to pay off debt. Okay, so I just made up that information too. But let's say Hammerfell has a gross domestic product of $10 billion. They produce in 1 year $10 billion worth of goods and services, and Cyrodiil produces $100 billion worth of goods and services. Skyrim, $7 billion worth of goods and services, and elsewhere produces $4 billion. At this point, you're kind of looking at Hammerfell and saying, actually, this doesn't look so good. They only make $10 billion a year, and it's not like the government can tax 100% of all of the goods of the value of all the goods and services. So even if they confiscated all of that in a year, all their people would starve, and they still would only be able to pay back 40% of their debt. For Cyrodiil, their GDP is $100 billion in a year, which is actually above what they owe, so they're actually in a better position even though they owe 3 times as many dollars. Skyrim, they're in a worse position, maybe a worse, similar position to Cyrodiil here, because they're making $7 billion worth of goods and services in a year that their government has available to tax, but they only owe $5 billion. And elsewhere, they're only bringing in $4 billion a year in production. So they're actually pretty badly off. Now, the best way to see how badly they are off is to take this gross domestic product number and divide this number by that. Okay, so we're going to get a ratio of how much you owe compared to your ability to repay it. So here you can see their debt to GDP ratio. It's a little more useful than just looking at government debt by itself. For Hammerfell, it's 250%. That's not very good. For Cyrodiil, it's only 75%. That's in a healthy range. Skyrim, similar. Healthy range, a little better off than Cyrodiil, but not so bad. And for elsewhere, they owe 175% of what they make every year. So that's pretty bad. It's not so bad as Hammerfell, but it's worse than Cyrodiil and Skyrim. But this is how you do it. We divided this number by this number, and if you get out a calculator and do that, hopefully you don't have to for this or this or this. You could do it by paper on hand. Actually, you could do this by paper too. This is an approximation, but that's how you get this debt to GDP ratio, which is a much more meaningful number. Alright, so according to the CIA World Factbook, which is one of those sources that I suggest you use because it's a pretty good source, in 2013, the United States' debt to GDP ratio was 71.8% or so. Not great, we could do better, but it's not bad either.